But really, I think this is a Jalen game where you look at it and say, if Jalen is merely, a B game for him, I don't know that Kansas wins. If Jalen goes out and puts together an A game, you might have a chance to pull this thing out in Lubbock.
Pay heed all who enter and beware of this podcast. That's right. This is the Pay Heed podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer, and of course, I'm here with Kevin Flaherty. We're brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in all things possible, member FDIC. On today's show, we're going to be talking all things KU football and Texas Tech. This will be a real test for the Jayhawks coming up in Lubbock. It'll be a big game against an undefeated top 10 Texas Tech team, so we're going to be breaking all that down, talking about the game and more here on today's show. So stay tuned for that. And if you haven't already, please subscribe, Apple and Spotify, and on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN. We had a fantastic outpouring of support for our live show after the KU-UCF game last Saturday. Really appreciate those who joined us there. And again, if you want to join us for our live postgame shows, the best way to do that is to be subscribed, because you'll be notified when we go live. And of course, we'll be live on Saturday night after the KU-Texas Tech game. Kickoff for that game is 6:30, so again, probably the same time frame as UCF. Should be live around 10 o'clock on Saturday night after the game, so you'll definitely want to come hang out with us live. You can join in with many other KU fans and join in on our live chat, join the conversation for some live reaction to KU and Texas Tech. So once again, the best way to do that is to subscribe on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN. Really appreciate you if you have already done so. Of course, you can like the video as well and drop a comment to share your thoughts ahead of this game. What do you think? How are you feeling about KU against Texas Tech in Lubbock? So share your thoughts in this video as well on our YouTube channel. And of course, if you're an audio-only listener, we appreciate your support as well. Be sure to leave a 5-star rating and review and subscribe as well. Apple, Spotify, those all help us get to more great KU fans like you. All right, let's dive in. KU and Texas Tech. Kansas coming off of that tight win against UCF 27-20. Multiple goal line stands for Kansas late in the game. Gets it done against the Knights. Kansas comes into this game with a 4-2 record now at 2-1 in conference play. And they are going up against a Texas Tech team, Kevin, that grabbed many headlines in the offseason with sort of their bullish approach to NIL, to building a roster, investing money. Obviously, Cody Campbell at this point has become a household name among college sports fans at Texas Tech for what he has done and how much he has openly kind of demonstrated his investment in Texas Tech. And the result is that Texas Tech has a pretty expensive roster by Big 12 standards, probably the most expensive roster in the Big 12, if I had to guess, in terms of NIL. And that's reflected in the fact that they have a lot of talent. And that, I think, in the preseason, they were getting all that hype. And I think for some people, it was a question of, okay, well, that's fine. But, will this sort of, for lack of a better term, experiment work, right? I mean, we haven't really seen this attempted in college football, where you just basically go out and try to buy, the top players out of the transfer portal to set yourselves up for success. And so far, the results have been very positive for Texas Tech. As I said, they are 5-0. They look really, really good. They've been very strong. If you dive deeper into the numbers, Kevin, they're basically like top 10, top 15 in the country in almost every metric that that you can look at. They're at the top of the Big 12 in most of those metrics as well. So this game, certainly, I think even at the beginning of the season, both you and I had circled this game as one of the real challenge games for Kansas. And now that it's here, I don't feel any different. I feel like this is going to be a very serious challenge for Kansas. Lance Leipold kind of touched on it on Monday, but, KU goes up against Missouri's front seven, their defensive line. Texas Tech has a similar caliber of defensive line. When we talked ahead of the Missouri game, we felt that Missouri was going to have the best defensive front KU may face, and that still may be true, but if it's 1A Missouri, it's 1B Texas Tech with what they have up front as well.
Yeah, there's not a big difference at all. And I think maybe the best read, if you're just doing research on Texas Tech, is by friend of the show who came on the show, Shahan Jayaraja at CBS Sports, wrote just a terrific sort of look at the, I don't want to say a risk, but sort of the calculated decision that Texas Tech made, sort of hey, this is the last year of quote unquote, you can't really call it true NIL, whatever NIL was before the rev share. And they said, hey, we have an opportunity here. It's not going to be, hey, can we do this over the next 10 years? It's, we have this window, and can you, kick open the window and get through it? And I do think it's a little bit unfair to Texas Tech, and Nick and a lot of you guys know that I'm maybe a little more partial to Texas Tech than some other people. I've known Joey McGuire a really long time. Actually, the first time I talked to Joey McGuire was when Kansas got a commitment from a kid named Marcus Herford back in the 2004 recruiting class. So I realize I'm dating myself, but Joey was the head coach at Cedar Hill High School back then. But I think it's interesting how everybody paints sort of Texas Tech as this unicorn in the way they attack it, when if you look at it realistically, I'm not sure it's that different than what Ohio State did a year ago that led Ohio State to a national title, where you go out and get Quinshon Judkins, you get Will Howard, you get the pieces that they did. And I think the other thing that makes them kind of similar in the way that they built this thing, and something that we mentioned before the season started in our previews, Texas Tech actually brought back one of the most experienced rosters in the Big 12. And so it wasn't a Colorado thing, right? Like, I think when you think of this sort of thing, you think about Colorado and what Deion Sanders is doing there in terms of, I'm just flipping my roster. And in Texas Tech's case, they had a pretty good group of guys, and then they said, okay, but where are we deficient? And they went out and really spent money to get those guys in. The number one rated player in the Big 12 by Pro Football Focus is Jacob Rodriguez, and he's a linebacker that's been at Texas Tech. So he's a returning guy. Texas, two of the next five are Romello Height and David Bailey. They're two defensive ends who Texas Tech went out and got in the transfer portal. And so I do think that this is a roster that we look at all the portal additions with good reason. But quite honestly, Nick, they had a pretty strong roster before they went out to get those guys too, which is why you're seeing them have so much success. They've got that combination of both experience at Texas Tech, the culture that they had built and all that, and then they went out and added NFL guys on top of that.
Well, and I do think you're right about some of the conversation around Texas Tech, because obviously in the current college landscape of athletics, there is an inherent bias towards the Big Ten and the SEC, right?
I mean, sure.
You'd have to be basically completely blind to not acknowledge that. And so because of that, people look at, let's say, just throwing out numbers here, a $35 million roster in the SEC versus a $35 million roster in the Big 12 are as two separate things. Like, right? Sure. Like in the SEC, that's like, oh, okay, that's fine. And if it's $35 million in the Big 12, it's like, oh my God, they went out and spent so much money and built this, like, oh my, So I think there is a little bit of some of that, just in the fact that, Texas Tech is basically trying to compete at that same level.
Sure.
And because they're not in that conference, they draw all this attention, they draw all these eyeballs, and they draw this, oh my gosh, look at what Texas Tech is doing. They're just going out and, trying to spend as much money as possible. And it's like, okay, well, that's what other schools in, the SEC and the Big Ten are doing.
Honest question, I don't know the answer, Nick. Is their roster more expensive than Texas or Texas A&M, even within their own state? Yeah, I don't know that it is.
There's no way it's more expensive than Texas.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I don't know that it's more expensive than A&M's either. Yeah. And so when you look at it where it's like, hey, we want to compete to win not just the Big 12, but we want to actually do something lasting, win college football playoff games. You look at the fact they may be the third priciest roster in their own damn state.
Yeah. A couple of quick KU news and notes from earlier in the week. Lance Leipold did give a little bit of an injury update. Deshaun Haneke is going to be out for the season. He had some surgery late last week, which, huge bummer for Kansas, obviously, because now you're talking about a guy that came in last season, I think, with some pretty high expectations and was performing well in camp, suffers the Achilles injury, ends up missing the entire season last year, comes into this season with a fresh perspective and a lot of experience, and was clearly KU's top tight end option, and then he goes down again with another injury that happened against Cincinnati. He's going to be out for the year, according to Lance Leipold. And then I'll just say this, kind of reading between the lines on some of Lance Leipold's comments regarding Daniel Hishaw. I was not very encouraged by what he said about Daniel Hishaw either. So
sure.
I think it's certainly Daniel Hishaw will not be playing against Texas Tech. And in my mind, I was thinking, okay, well, maybe you get him back after the bye week for K-State. I'm not even sure if that's a possibility now. So again, just simply reading between the lines on what Lance Leipold said. We'll obviously hope for the best on that and see where that goes. The one positive though is that Cam Pickett actually on Tuesday when we spoke to him said that he's fully 100%. I basically just asked him straight up like, are you good? And he was like, yeah, I'm good. So that's good news. And obviously that was reflected in the fact that he led Kansas in receptions and receiving for the Jayhawks against UCF, which was a really, really positive thing to see as well on the injury front. So Laith Marjan also was a guy who popped up on the injury report, ended up playing against UCF, hit that field goal. I'm guessing he's probably going to be okay. Lance Leipold kind of mentioned him as well. So those are sort of the major injuries that were mentioned by Lance Leipold specifically earlier in the week. And then, of course, Cam Pickett saying that he's good to go, which is a positive. Kevin, one more thing here, but I want to take a little bit of a deeper dive into the numbers on Texas Tech here coming up. But one other thing that also really jumped out to me that I wanted to discuss real quick before we get to a break is some of what Joey McGuire said about Kansas. In fact, basically, he flat out said, like, Kansas should be 6-0, which I think got the attention of a lot of folks, obviously including us from the KU perspective. And I'll just say this: I mean, he's not entirely wrong. Like he's not. The argument is there.
Yeah. And I think a lot of Missouri fans took issue with the thing where he said they were dominating Missouri, and he, the way he put it, it wasn't like he was like they dominated Missouri that whole game. When Kansas was up 21-3, Kansas was, or 21-6, Kansas was dominating Missouri at that point, and so his point is made. But Kansas has had opportunities, and it's funny, Nick, because I think you and I both learned our lesson from a year ago, where we both looked at the schedule and we said, "Oh, schedule looks manageable. This Kansas team is going to win 80 bajillion games." And then it wound up being one of the harder Big 12 schedules. You wound up playing the top teams in the Big 12. It's just the top teams weren't who people thought they were going to be. And here you are with Kansas heading into Lubbock, and this is a game we thought before the season would maybe be Kansas's toughest game of the season. I think it probably is Kansas's toughest game of the season, especially where it falls in the schedule. But Kansas's 2 losses, Nick, are to teams that are a combined 9-1. Cincinnati having the 1 loss basically in a road game against Nebraska at Arrowhead. By like a field goal. And that's the only thing keeping them from undefeated. And so Kansas is about to play its 7th game. And basically 3 of those teams were this close from all 3 of them being undefeated. And so that's why there's a major risk in saying, hey, this schedule is manageable. It sure should work out to win a lot of games, because once again, heading into this offseason, I think we thought, Nick, this schedule it's setting things up. Kansas is going to have a chance to do some things, and you start to look at it, and even some of the games that you thought were going to be some of the tougher ones maybe aren't, and some of the games that you didn't think were going to be as difficult. If you said beforehand, hey, K-State or Cincinnati, what's going to be the tougher game? Nobody would have guessed Cincinnati. And I'm not saying the game against K-State won't be difficult, because it will be, but Cincinnati is looking like a top 5 Big 12 team, maybe even, one of those teams that could put themselves in position to go to the Big 12 title game. And Kansas State has obviously struggled a little bit this season.
Yeah, I got to be honest. I underestimated Cincinnati going into the KU game.
Yeah, same.
And to be fully transparent with you, Kevin, I underestimated them even after the game. I did not expect them to then do what they did against Iowa State. Now, they almost blew it, but, I mean, they had over 200 yards rushing in the first half against Iowa State. Yeah. They were unstoppable. So, yeah, Cincinnati, I think I have to give them their flowers now, because I've underestimated them, 2 weeks in a row, basically, when they were coming to Lawrence and then at home against Iowa State, and they won both those games. Now, I guess we'll see how Iowa State is after some of the injuries that they've had, especially in their secondary. But for Cincinnati, they were doing it on the ground. It wasn't even like they were just throwing all over Iowa State in that game. So, yeah, I mean, it just goes to underscore, something we've talked about a lot on this show, which is you really, it's very hard to know week to week in the Big 12 in terms of, who sort of the elite teams are and who are some of the teams that can maybe jump up and bite you on any given Saturday. Now, I will say, talking about underestimating Cincinnati, I don't think either of us is underestimating Texas Tech. Like, no. we both recognize that this is, as you said, potentially going to be Kansas's most difficult game on the schedule. Obviously the Missouri game was tough considering it being on the road and the rivalry aspect of it, but this is going to be also very tough. And Texas Tech always has a great home environment, especially, if you're a KU basketball fan, you probably maybe have some nightmares like I do about some of KU's road games in Lubbock against Texas Tech. I'm expecting it'll be the same thing for them at home on I believe it's going to be homecoming for them as well. And they're also unveiling some new jerseys. They unveiled a bunch of new logos. They're kind of going back to the retro sort of.
They got the drone show coming out for the game too.
They are pulling out all the stops.
How much help does Texas Tech need?
Yeah, no kidding. They're pulling out all the stops. Or the big question is, Kevin, is, man, how big of a brand is Kansas that they got on all this?
Like,
they're not doing this for anybody else except Kansas.
Biggest game of the season for Texas Tech, obviously.
Yeah, so it should be a lot of fun, and we're going to dive a little bit deeper into some of the numbers on Texas Tech, and maybe I want to give you a little bit of positives for Kansas as well. I don't want to just write Kansas out completely for this game, but we'll be diving into a little bit more of that coming up after the break. But first, that gives us a chance to remind you that calling all Chiefs fans, you could be on the field inside the 50-yard line at GEHA Field for the official coin toss at a Chiefs home game this season. Visit Chiefs.com/GEHA now. Enter to win a chance to be on the field for a once-in-a-lifetime view of the pregame coin toss. Plus, you can score other exclusive prizes. Enter for a chance to win at Chiefs.com/GEHA. GEHA is a proud partner of the Kansas City Chiefs. More KU football talk is coming up next.
Looking for tickets for your next event? Tickets for Less is your #1 source. Save big on every purchase when you use promo code KCSN at ticketsforless.com.
I'm Brett Goodwin, one of the owners of The Learning Tree. The Learning Tree is a neighborhood toy store in Prairie Village, Kansas. This has been here in this location since 2000s, and my husband Alan and I purchased the store in 2023. Alan and I grew up in families where we've always wanted to have a business together. Alan grew up, for instance, his parents had a jewelry store. I worked in a local toy store here in Prairie Village when I was growing up. When this opportunity happened in 2023, we knew right away we wanted to contact them and pursue the store. We wouldn't have been able to get the store without the team at Emprise Bank. From the day we contacted them, they knew what we needed to do, which was very helpful. I would absolutely recommend the team at Emprise Bank to anyone looking to secure a business. We worked with Emprise from day one. They were extremely helpful. They were always great resources. We talk to them frequently. They know the area. They're very friendly. We know who we're going to talk with, and they know what we need to do. We hope we'll see you at the Learning Tree.
This is the paid podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer, along with Kevin Flaherty. Of course, we're brought to you by Emprise Bank, your partner in Possible, all member FDIC. And once again, if you have not already, please go ahead and subscribe on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN. You can find clips of Lance Leipold, clips of players and coordinators as well throughout the week, each week talking about each of the KU opponents, including KU's upcoming opponent on Saturday against Texas Tech. And we're going to be talking a lot more about Texas Tech here coming up in just a moment. But feel free to share your thoughts. You can join the conversation in our YouTube comments on the show. Be sure to like the show, subscribe to the channel. And once again, I would highly encourage you to come join us on Saturday night after the KU Texas Tech game for our live reaction show on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN. And the best way to make sure that you're there is to subscribe so that you're notified when we go live. And you can join us along with many other fantastic Kansas fans live for our reaction show when KU plays Texas Tech on Saturday night.
Celebrate or commiserate, right?
Yeah, exactly. Celebrates and or maybe events. Sometimes those shows kind of turn into a little bit of what, But let's just say you don't want to miss it. Let's just say you won't want to miss it. You want to be tuned in coming up on Saturday night. Ahead of the break, we were talking about kind of Texas Tech just more generally and what they've kind of done up to this point in the season. But diving in a little bit of them more specifically, as I said, they're basically elite everywhere when you look at the numbers. I mean, they're in the upper top 15, 20 in the country in most stats, and in the top of the Big 12 in a lot of stats. A couple quick highlights. You mentioned David Bailey earlier in the show. Kevin is 4th in the country with 5.5 sacks. Had a big game against Houston last week that the Texas Tech won pretty comfortably. And, there was a bit of interesting storyline surrounding Texas Tech heading into that game last week against Houston, Kevin, because you go back to Texas Tech goes and plays at Utah, a game that you and I had both kind of talked about as, hey, if you're a fan of the Big 12 or you're wanting to see maybe, the cream of the crop of the Big 12, that may be a game to watch. Texas Tech ultimately just kind of steamrolls Utah, but there was a little bit of drama in that game. Baron Morton got knocked out. Will Heyman came in and played fantastic, their backup quarterback. And, I think it did raise a little bit of some questions about, okay, maybe does Texas Tech consider switching quarterbacks? They had the bye week, which allowed Baron Morton to get healthy, and Baron Morton was the quarterback for them against Houston, threw for 340 yards and a touchdown and everything. That seemed to kind of put that discussion to bed, I think. So it'll be Baron Morton, you would assume, for Texas Tech after what he did against Houston. But also, I'll just say this. Don't be fooled. And we've actually had this conversation in the past couple seasons about Texas Tech, Kevin, is that this is not Mike Leach Texas Tech. This is not air raid Texas Tech. This is a very balanced offensive attack that Texas Tech has, averaging over 200 yards rushing on the ground, and total averaging almost 570 yards per game overall. So this is a very balanced team. And, setting aside our arguments about Taj Brooks and how great he is, he's obviously no longer on the team, but this is still a very, very balanced offensive attack that Texas Tech can wield, which is going to be a real challenge for this Kansas defense.
Yeah, especially since, I've always felt balance is less about run and pass and more about the different guys that you get the ball to. And Texas Tech gets the ball to about 80 bajillion guys at all different positions. Jacoby Williams, maybe you're bottling him up a little bit in the run game, and then they hit him for a passing play out of the backfield. That's something they do really well. They've got good tight ends, especially, they went to the portal and got Terrence Carter, who's really, really good. They've got a good group of wide receivers that they spread the ball around to. And so Baron Morton doesn't need to be, first team All Big 12 in order for this team to have a lot of success. And I do think he's underrated, honestly, but he has a lot of places to spread the ball around to. If he can avoid mistakes, they're generally going to be pretty good at it. And we've talked about the offense, Nick. They are elite on defense right now. Their defense may be even further ahead than where their offense is.
Yeah, I was going to mention with the defense, it's a good segue. We mentioned David Bailey. You talked about Jacob Rodriguez, the linebacker, who is maybe one of the best players in the Big 12, to be honest. Like, he's looking like that level of player. Romello Hyde, obviously, this is going to be a really difficult defensive line. Bryce Foster talked about dealing with the way Texas Tech lines up on the interior, having a nose tackle right over you, that the challenges that can pose. So it's going to be very tough for this Kansas offense. But I will say this, as it relates to the defense specifically, Kevin, let me give you a couple positives here, I think, for Kansas.
Yep.
If you want to look at the positive for KU, Texas Tech is 5-0. They haven't really played the greatest of offenses up to this point of the season. They've played Arkansas, Pine Bluff, Kent State, Oregon State, Utah with an injured Devin Dampier. I don't know. There was that weird situation where he wasn't very good, and then he wasn't on the Ranger report, and then later on afterwards.
And don't forget, he got them over the top on a deep ball in that game that got called back because one of Utah's offensive linemen was an idiot and was 5 yards downfield.
Yes.
I don't like that. That sounds really harsh. I do not know to this day what that guy was thinking being that far down. I understand, hey, you're trying to stay within a certain yardage range. Maybe you take a step over or whatever, but this guy was racing to the sticks almost when they hit him over the top for a deep ball. And so that was a play where they got beat over the top and it didn't wind up counting. And I bring up that specific play only to say, I do think on the back end, Nick, maybe they're a little bit more vulnerable than they've shown so far in a way that Kansas would be able to compete at that level. When you look at Jalen Daniels throwing the ball and guys like Emmanuel Henderson and Cam Pickett and Bowden Gruden catching the ball down the field.
Yeah, so Utah asterisk, I guess, for the defense. And then a Houston team that I'm sure I know you're very high on, Kevin, with what they're building. Maybe still a year or two away from really being at that level, right?
Especially offensively. I think they're a lot closer defensively, Houston is. But if we're talking about offenses, Houston's not at that point yet of where they want to be.
Yeah. So to summarize, yes, the defense is very good. Yes, the defense has a lot of talent, but they maybe haven't necessarily seen an offense that is capable of hitting its stride the way Kansas's offense is. So that'll be something to keep an eye on. That all being said, Texas Tech, they're 4th in the country in scoring defense at just 12 points per game. They're top 10 in the country in turnover margin at +6. They forced 12 turnovers in just 5 games. Now, a lot of those did come against Utah. I will say that, which that was a really bizarre turnover game, kind of both ways. Yeah. And then they are giving up just 244 yards per game total as well. So that is, it's going to be a tough ask for Kansas, right? Coming into this game against Texas Tech. And for Texas Tech, on the bad side of this kind of goes against the KU's offense. Texas Tech's also top 10 in the country in third down defense, allowing a 25% conversion rate. And if you look at Kansas's offense for, I think, as great as Kansas has been at certain moments over the course of this season, that third down offense continues to be an issue for KU. Kansas is 125th in the country in third down offense at just over 30% conversion rate on third down. So that continues to be a bit of a bugaboo for Kansas for, I think, various reasons. I think we talked about it a little bit last week, but, part of it is we've seen Kansas get into a little bit more third and longs, I think, scenarios this season than we've seen in the past. And some of that, at least from my perspective, I think has to do with a little bit of a lack of running game for Kansas.
Yeah.
I felt like last year, if it's a 2nd and 10 or 2nd and 8, you could give the ball to Devin Neal and you could know that you're going to be setting up for, 3rd and 4, 3rd and 3, whatever it may be. That hasn't been the case this season, obviously, for Kansas with some of the lack of running game that they've had. And so that they've struggled on third down. And that also has been one of the areas where Texas Tech has been so strong. So that's something to consider, I think, when you look at the offense for Kansas and what they're able to do. But this to me feels like a game, Kevin, where I think we talked about it after the Cincinnati game. It's felt like at times the Kansas offense has really, really sort of lived and died by explosive plays at times this season. This may be a game where you maybe need to rely on that, lean into that and say, okay, let's see if we can just bust Emmanuel Henderson. Let's see if we can just bust Cam Pickett a couple times and really try to open things up. And hopefully by maybe doing that early in the game, that'll loosen things up and you can establish a run game, because I do think you're going to have to be able to do that. We've talked about how at times I think you can sort of just say, Jalen, go make a play and go produce. And I think he's able to do that. I think if you just put the entire offense on his shoulders, he can make it work. You can look at the Missouri game, I think, as an example of that. But I don't know if that's necessarily a recipe for success in a game like this, where I think you will need to find a little bit more balance, whether it's Jalen Daniels running the ball as well, whether it's utilizing more of Isaiah Marshall, whether it's, Leshaun Williams really getting going again after 3 touchdowns against UCF. But that feels like it's going to be a critical part of the offense as well for Kansas. And because the other thing that really concerns me, Kevin, about this game, and this was an issue for Kansas early on in the year, hasn't been an issue so much in their past couple, in the last game against UCF, was obviously we spent a lot of time talking about number of plays and time of possession for Kansas and in their losses, against Missouri and against Cincinnati too. This, to me, screams like a game that could be an issue again, where if your offense is unable to sustain any sort of drives, it could be a game where Texas Tech is possessing the ball and just grinding you down defensively over the course of the game. So I think that's going to be important as well for Kansas is to do a little bit, maintain possession, right, as well in this game. So I don't know. Overall, I'm obviously less worried about the offense than I think I am about the defense, which I do want to get more into the defense here shortly and kind of look at that side of the ball as well for Kansas. But offensively, Kevin, when you look at where KU was at, what are you looking for? What do you got your ears perked up for? What are you expecting out of this one?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Pro Football Focus grades aren't everything, Nick, obviously, and there are some cases where they seem skewed one way or another. But I did think it was interesting. There are 6 players in the Big 12 right now with qualifying snaps who have ratings of 90 or above, which is basically, NFL caliber stuff. 6 players across the whole conference. 3 of them are in Texas Tech's front 7 when you look at the 2 defensive ends and Jacob Rodriguez. And so that's going to be tough for Kansas to get into what you're talking about instead of being in 3rd and 7, finding a way to be there in 3rd and 3. I think that's going to be a real challenge in this one. And I think you hit the nail on that head. I think the other part of that equation and why I would agree with you that I think this is another game that Kansas is really at risk of getting out-snapped by a big margin is Texas Tech is one of those teams that's pretty forward-thinking from an analytics standpoint in terms of going for it on 4th down. And you look at Kansas's defense on 4th downs, on closing out money drives, not necessarily so great.
I have the numbers right here in front of me if you want to hear them, Kevin.
I would love to hear those, Nick.
I was actually going to bring that up. So the Kansas defense, while it may feel like Kansas has struggled to stop teams on third downs this season, they're 47th in the country in third down defense, which is, slightly above average, 35%. Now, what that does not include, which is something you were just mentioning, is the fourth downs, right?
Yep.
And in that category, Kansas is 103rd in the country in stopping fourth downs. At 11 for 17 teams are against Kansas on fourth down. So when you combine those numbers, it doesn't look as good. And that's what we're talking about here. A lot of those drives where Kansas has given up those fourth downs, it's been in those scenarios. It's been, okay, yeah, you stop them or you quote unquote get off the field on third down, but it's 4th and 2, it's 4th and 3, and they go for it and you don't stop them, right? So that is something I would say to keep an eye on as well. I love that you brought that up because I do think that's going to be something that's going to pop up, and that I expect Texas Tech to be aggressive. I think they will be aggressive.
Yeah, and if Kansas finds a way to get stops on a couple of those, that could very well, Nick, be the reason that we're looking up afterwards and saying, hey, Kansas had a better game than we thought they were going to, because they were able to get off the field in those situations. It's not the easiest thing to do, and it's funny. Kansas is 103rd, you said, on the fourth down stuff. Yeah. They've got stops on their last 2 fourth downs because they were able to get the stop on the goal line stand against UCF. And then obviously on that final drive. So even that is, that 103rd, as crazy as it sounds, is maybe been skewed a little bit more positively than it has been. One of the things that I am interested in, though, Nick, you brought up the explosives, and I 100% agree with you. Kansas is going to have to get some explosives to win this game. 3 of Kansas's best drives of the season from a prolonged standpoint have come in Kansas's last 5 quarters. When you look at the drive to take the lead against Cincinnati and the 2 first half touchdown drives against UCF. And so I do wonder a little bit, hey, is this something that they're starting to come around on a little bit more than maybe where they were earlier this season? And that's something I'm interested to see in this game, because Texas Tech is really good at forcing negative plays. And when I say negative play, I don't just mean tackles for loss, sacks, etc. I mean, like a 1-yard run on, first down is technically a positive play, but it's a negative play in that you're behind the sticks. It's basically a stop on that play. And so are you able to get yourself into more third and manageable stuff? And when you get into those situations, are you making the plays you need to make to continue drives going? I also wonder, too, Nick, if this isn't a game that Lance Leipold isn't going to have to look at it ahead of time and almost say, hey, Texas Tech's going to roll those dice on fourth down. We may need to be even just a little bit more aggressive in those situations where, hey, you've got 4th and 3 from the 45. Maybe we would punt this typically, but we're going to have to hold on to the ball and possess it and try and get something here.
Boy, I would love to see that, Kevin, but I think you probably know where I stand in that I'm not going to hold my breath for Kansas to be more aggressive. And I thought it was really interesting when Jim Zabrowski was kind of breaking down how KU approached the end of the game against UCF. And it was basically, Jim Zabrowski was basically saying, hey, I'll share my 2 cents, but then whatever Lance says is final, right? Yeah. So if it's going back to that game against UCF on that third down play, if it's Zabrowski saying, hey, let's put the ball in Jalen's hands, and Lance says, you know what? No, I want UCF to be forced to use that last timeout. That's what you saw ended up happening. So I guess it's a in one way you can look at it and be like, okay, that's a good thing in that it's obvious that they're on the same page, right? In that it's the final call for Leipold. That's what we're doing. On the flip side, though, it puts a little seed of doubt in my mind that much is going to change from that perspective then for KU, because I feel like I've been pretty clear on this week to week. I don't anticipate that Lance Leipold is going to dramatically change his philosophy on those types of situations. Yeah. Maybe in a game like this, he surprises and is a little bit more aggressive in some situations.
Again, I'm not saying he's going to YOLO ball this, but I just think that there are situations where Lance Leipold has been a little bit more aggressive. And I think that a lot of times when those have happened, it's almost been something that has not been spur of the moment, right? Because I think spur of the moment, Lance Leipold looks at that situation and says, punt the football. But I almost think it's something where you go into the game saying, this is a game that we're going to have to maybe reach a little bit more than we normally would. And so, like I said, I'm not saying, hey, 4th and 7 from your own side of the field, like let the big dog eat type of deal. I'm more just saying that I think it is realistic when you look at Kansas's history under Lance Leipold, that in games like this where maybe you're going to face longer drives, extended 4th downs, things like that, that I do think that there's a chance that they're going to be just a little bit more aggressive with that than maybe normal.
Let's take one more quick break and then get into some players to watch, plus our game picks, and also have a chance to a little bit more about the betting side of this game with KCSN betting analyst Benny Heisler.
Since KU got pretty good at football, it's weird to see them with a pretty large plus spread to their name, but that's the case right now at DraftKings Sportsbook as the Jayhawks head on the road to Lubbock to take on number 9 Texas Tech. Spread right now is KU anywhere between plus 14, plus 14.5. It's been flip-flopping throughout the day over at DK Sportsbook, with the total sitting at 59.5. I've seen this number drop from 60.5 down to 59.5. And like I've mentioned, the number on the spread has been moving anywhere from where it opened at plus 13.5 for KU to now plus 14.5. I think this is too many points for the Jayhawks. And while I completely understand if you can find the 14.5, taking that for the game, my pick for this week is going to be taking the Jayhawks at plus 7.5 in the first half. I know that Texas Tech has looked unbelievable, right? Like they're averaging like 569 total yards per game on offense, number 1 offense right now in the country in yards per play. But I do think KU could come out firing, especially in the first half. Maybe stun Texas Tech a little bit. Remember, I had a big game last week. It was a primetime game against another undefeated team in Houston, blew the doors off of them once again. I do think KU will be ready for this matchup, and I do think you'll see a little bit more of a back and forth, perhaps a more competitive game over in Lubbock this week. One key area that I think we're going to want to pay attention to is penalty yards. It hasn't mattered for Texas Tech because they've just been destroying everybody, but they're 127th in the FBS, averaging about 76.5 penalty yards per game. Jayhawks far better as far as penalties are concerned, only averaging 4.7 yards per game in penalty yards. That could be a difference here. And I think it does allow, especially a team that, like KU, can hang with Texas Tech, expect it to be a little bit closer in the margin. So maybe they don't win, but I do expect the Jayhawks to cover, certainly with a very good number at plus 7.5 in the first half. KU plus 7.5 over on DraftKings Sportsbook this week.
Chiefs Kingdom, I have got a question for you. What is your favorite touchdown? Well, for me, I can confidently say that my favorite touchdown, it's the next one, because with DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL, every touchdown could bring you closer to cashing in. From the first touchdown score to anytime touchdown props or the thrill of live in-game betting, every snap is loaded with opportunity. From spreads to money lines, same-game parlays, regular parlays, you want it, DraftKings has got it. Here's the best part. Bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets instantly. I use DraftKings Sportsbook, and you should too. Your team hitting pay dirt pays out to you. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use code KCSN. That's code KCSN to turn $5 into $200 in bonus bets if your bet wins. In partnership with DraftKings, the crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort in Kansas, fees may apply in Illinois. 21 plus age and eligibility varies by jurisdiction. Void in Ontario. Bet must win to receive reward. Minimum minus 500 odds required. Bonus bets expire 7 days after issuance. For additional terms and responsible gaming resources, see dkng.co/audio.
This is the Paid Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer, along with Kevin Flaherty, brought to you by Emprise Bank. Your part in all things possible, member FDIC. Once again, I would highly encourage you, urge you even, to subscribe on YouTube and on Apple and Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. On our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN, you can subscribe there, so you'll be notified when we go live on our YouTube channel after all KU football games this season, including Saturday night against Texas Tech. You heard a little bit about the betting there from Ben Heisler. Shout out to him. Kansas, a pretty big underdog in this game, Kevin. And since Lance Leipold has sort of, rejuvenated this Kansas program, it's kind of been a while since you've seen KU be as big of an underdog as they are in this one against Texas Tech at 14 and a half. That's a pretty big number, so we'll see how that plays out. But before we get into sort of that and what our game picks may be, let's talk about some players to watch here for this game on Saturday against Texas Tech. We'll start with the offense, Kevin. Who's a player you will be keeping an eye on offensively for Kansas in Lubbock?
Yeah, I feel like every week I say it should be Jalen Daniels, and then I go with somebody else. And so this week I'll just say it's Jalen Daniels, right? Like I think that when you look at this game, it does remind me a lot of the Missouri game in terms of potentially the way that your defense could be on the field. You're dealing with a lot of offensive weapons where it's going to be difficult to slow down the other team because you take away ABC, they have no problems getting the ball to D, E, and F. And I think that that's going to be a big part of it. And then when you look at the offensive line working against that Texas Tech defensive line, I don't know that Kansas is going to be able to run the ball consistently in this one. You would love to see it, right? Like if there were ever a time for this year's team to just bust out 250 yards at 5.5 yards a carry, this would be great. But I think the other part of that, Nick, and one of the things I've mentioned before that I think is so underrated about Jalen Daniels is he is one of the best quarterbacks that I've seen in terms of turning bad plays into good plays from a pressure standpoint. When you look at, hey, guys are getting up the field in the pass rush, he looks dead to rights. There's two guys with him in their sights, and he just kind of squeezes around and either finds a receiver or runs downfield. And when you look at last year, I think we could admit Jalen was at the best, you would say he was rusty to start the year. Still only got sacked 10 times all year, and that was with him having some games where he was running for his life pretty consistently. This year, by the way, Nick, he's on the exact same pace. He's been sacked 5 times through 6 games, and I think we've seen similar stuff, right? Where you've seen Jalen get pressured and basically bail out a missed block or a missed protection and go make a play. And so I think both his ability to avoid pressure, the fact that he's probably going to need to make the odd play with his legs, and the fact that if they're taking away the running game, Jalen Daniels is going to have a really good game for Kansas to have a shot. I'd love to say somebody like Emmanuel Henderson because of the need for explosives, but really I think this is a Jalen game where you look at it and say, if Jalen is merely, a B game for him, I don't know that Kansas wins. If Jalen goes out and puts together an A game, you might have a chance to pull this thing out in Lubbock.
My pick or picks,
all right,
I'm going to tee it a little bit here, do tie in with Jalen Daniels and some of what you just talked about, in that I am going to look at the offensive tackles for Kansas. I'm picking Enrique Cruz and Calvin Clements.
Yeah.
Those two guys are going to be in for some very, very important snaps coming up on Saturday because of the Texas Tech pass rush and kind of what we've outlined and what the Red Raiders can bring. And so I'm kind of looking at those guys. I think you and I talked, and we haven't really talked much about Calvin Clements really at all this season. And, that could be a good thing, right? When you're not talking about the offensive line, but also, for a player of his caliber, you want to see him pop and make some plays. So he's certainly one to keep an eye on. And then Enrique Cruz, who battled with Nolan Gorsica and eventually kind of locked down that tackle spot opposite Calvin Clements. Big game for those guys. Big game for those guys to ensure that Jalen Daniels has enough time to create and to make the plays that you just talked about, right? Like, I do agree with you. Like Jalen Daniels, one of his more probably underrated qualities about him is that creativity that he has, is that ability that he can escape, his elusiveness in the pocket, and his ability to then go from there and make plays down the field or scramble. But you still have to give him the opportunity to even do that, right? And so I think the bookends of the offensive line will be very critical in this game for Kansas. The two tackles going up against some of that pass rush for Texas Tech, because the last thing you want to see is guys coming off the edge and immediately either, crunching Jalen Daniels in the pocket or keeping him hemmed in or not letting him scramble or worst case scenario, sacking him every time. Yeah. So those are the guys that I'll be keeping an eye on this game. And again, I think it very much does directly tie into what you talked about with Jalen Daniels and what he can bring to the table. Because, yeah, I mean, Emmanuel Henderson's going to be important, obviously. Cam Pickett's going to be important, obviously. You mentioned the run game, with LeSean Williams. Hopefully, you'd love to see that get going a little bit. I'll be curious to see if Bowden Gruen re-equips the cloak of invisibility, after swapping out, recognizing his whatever his opponent is. In an RPG, before you go into a cave, what equipment you're going to need ahead of time. So maybe he'll go back to the cloak of invisibility for this game. But yeah, I'm looking at the offensive line. I'm looking at the tackle specifically to make sure that Jalen Daniels does have the time to do what he can do best, or put him in a position to do what he can do best in this game.
David Bailey had some absolutely dirty pass rush moves in their last game. I think, not that he's been bad this season. Romello Height has been terrific, but I think David Bailey is starting to build that confidence level where he's starting to really come on. The other thing about that defensive line, Nick, that's kind of wild, I think Kansas's defensive tackles have been pretty good. Would you agree, generally speaking?
Yeah. Yeah, overall, yeah.
So Tommy Dunn on Pro Football Focus is Kansas's highest rated defensive tackle. Texas Tech has 4 defensive tackles rated higher than Tommy Dunn. So Texas Tech's defensive line, their front, and obviously you start talking about that linebacking group and Jacob Rodriguez, that's a tall task for that offensive line. And if Calvin, has the kind of game that he's capable of, and he's had some struggles this year, Nick, then that could go a long way toward, Kansas kind of mitigating that threat a little bit and maybe having a little bit better chance on offense.
On the flip side, the Kansas defense coming off that game against UCF, especially in the second half, they shut out the Knights. Maybe that helps them build a little bit of confidence heading into this game. Hopefully it's not fool's gold, and that they can start to build, but obviously a tall task for them defensively as well against this Texas Tech offense. I mentioned earlier, 570 yards of offense almost. They're very balanced. And so for this Kansas defense, Kevin, who are you keeping an eye on for KU on Saturday?
Yeah, I love your point about the confidence thing. I've said on the show before, there's nothing more dangerous than, a group of 18 to 22-year-olds with confidence. And it is amazing how much better players play when they're in those situations and they've made big plays. And I actually had a chance to ask Lance Leipold about that, specifically with the young guys, right? Like, it's one thing to make a play in practice. You go out and make a play like Austin Alexander did to break up the pass late in that game against UCF. A lot of times it feels like that can be just a huge building block in a guy's development where he says, okay, I can hang at this point. I can do big things. And Austin's made big plays earlier this year, but that was a big play in a huge situation that helped win the game. And so you would like to see them play with a lot of confidence. I think the guy that I will pick on defense is a guy who wound up, maybe being the player of the game, not from, I get he made some mistakes, he was imperfect, but Bengali Kamara, right? He was a guy that, came in, and obviously Kansas's defense all of a sudden started turning out stops. He had a lot to do with that. But a big part of the reason I'm picking him here, Nick, is just the fact that he may be Kansas's best negative play merchant. And I think if Kansas is going to get stops against Texas Tech, you can't allow them to get to 4th and 2 or any 4th down situation. They're going to look at it and be like, yeah, why not? Because I think that really, we talked about confidence. Nothing is more debilitating toward a defense than to get a stop on 3rd down and the offense stays out there and picks it up on 4th down and keeps the drive going. And so in order to keep from those situations, Kansas is going to have to get Texas Tech out in some third and a little bit longer situations where they won't go for it on fourth down. And I think if they're going to do that, that means making plays in the backfield. And I really do think that Bengali Kamara's athleticism, his aggressiveness, and his ability to not just make plays for himself in the backfield, but also, kind of stop things at the point of attack where other guys can get involved in the backfield. I think that's going to be such a huge aspect of this week's game.
Kevin, Baron Morton is a very experienced quarterback. He's really strong, but two things about him. Number one, he is not a scrambling quarterback. He is not a rushing quarterback. He is your prototypical pocket passer. He will not.
Will Hammond, by the way, the former Hutto Hippo, if he winds up coming in, can absolutely run. So that's you talked about the quarterback thing, and so that is one of those things that, if for whatever reason, I'm sorry to cut you off there.
Oh, yeah, you're good.
If for whatever reason something happens to Baron Morton, or even if it winds up getting to Will Hammond, Kansas is going to have to adjust its defensive game plan kind of on the fly, because he is actually a legitimate risk to break long runs in addition to throwing the ball, and it can really open things up for that offense.
The second thing I would point out about Baron Morton, besides the fact that he's a pocket passer, is I get the sense that he can be prone to some mistakes if you can get to him a little bit, if you can disrupt sort of his rhythm, right? If you can sort of get to him and make him think fast, make him try to make decisions. I think that's something that Kansas may be able to do, or something that I guess you would want to do if you want to try to disrupt Baron Morton. And so that is why, Kevin, I'm gonna do the same thing on the defense. I'm gonna kind of pick two guys, but I'm gonna start with Dean Miller. Coming off the edge. This is a game where you talk about Dean Miller, and his biggest strength is that his speed, right? The speed rush, the ability to move quickly. Okay, go get to Baron Morton, right? I feel like Dean Miller, he's had some pop moments in this season, but I think overall in the first half of the year, I don't really think he's had quite the season, on the stat sheet that you would expect him to have, considering last year he was a first team All Big 12 player, right? I think on the second team. Yeah. So I want to see more out of him. And then the other guy that got a ton of buzz, got a ton of talk in fall camp, and even into the first part of the season, Leroy Harris, right? Yeah. I feel like he's gone kind of quiet over the past couple of games as well. Get a pass rush going against Baron Morton. Disrupt him. Put him under duress. He's not a guy that's going to scramble. So, you talk about maybe at times the Achilles heel of the Kansas defense in the past was guys that can scramble. That's not Baron Morton. So you should be able to get after him and make plays against him. And to me, I look at it and say I think that's KU's probably best chance of generating some more chaotic plays, putting pressure on Baron Morton, both literally and metaphorically, to maybe, possibly mess things up. But I will say the way you do that is by making sure that Texas Tech is in third down and long situations, or third and, not third and short. So there's going to be that aspect of it as well. But I would just love to see the Kansas defense put a little bit more pressure on Baron Morton. I don't think they've been as effective lately in terms of getting to the quarterback. And I think a lot of that, you look at a guy like Dean Miller as sort of your leader in that when it comes to that conversation. And then again, Leroy Harris, a guy that burst onto the scene a little bit in fall camp and seemed like he was poised maybe to have a big season or have an impactful season, and maybe hasn't quite fully done that over the past couple games. So I'm looking at those guys to get some pressure on the Texas Tech quarterback.
Yeah, I like those picks. That was a lot of the same reasoning I had for Bengali Kamara. And I think Blake Harreld's going to be big. One of the reasons Kansas runs, I call it kind of their bear front, where they have the five guys across. It's not actually a bear front if you want to be really typical, or if you want to be really technical about where guys are lined up. But it's kind of a bear front. I've heard other coaches call what KU does a bear front. And that's a really long way to say the whole reason you do that is you've got five guys rushing against five offensive linemen, and so you're getting one-on-one matchups. And so, to your point, Dean Miller can win those matchups. If Leroy Harris can win those matchups, Blake Harreld has been winning those matchups more and more in the pass rush, then you have a chance to be pretty successful. I would also say, Nick, Texas Tech's offensive line, pretty talented. I'm not sure that they have entirely meshed just yet. When you watch them, there's still the odd plays here or there, and Kansas's offensive line's in a similar place, to be quite frank. When you watch Kansas's offensive line actually on tape and watch it play by play, they maybe aren't as far away as you think they are. It's a little bit here, a little bit of an angle here, right? A glancing block here versus full contact. I think Texas Tech has not quite put it all together on the offensive line as well. And so if Kansas's defensive line can come up, play the type of game they did against Missouri, because I think what was lost with all the rushing yards that Missouri had in that game, the defensive line actually played really well in that game and gave Kansas a chance. If the defensive line plays that kind of game, then Kansas is going to hang around in this thing.
All right, well, let's get to it, Kevin, real quick. Do you think Kansas gets it done? Do they spoil the party for Texas Tech on homecoming and come away from Lubbock with a win?
I have Texas Tech winning this, and I did before the season started too. I think both of us did in our preseason picks. It's tough to go win in Lubbock when Texas Tech is like a 6-6 team. It's going to be really tough to win in Lubbock with the type of team, the type of depth that they have at Texas Tech right now. One thing I will say, though, Nick, because our predictions are, we got to give score and all of those things. Lance Leipold does not get blown out very often. And when you look at even some of the double-digit losses that he's had in recent years, a lot of them were close, where Kansas hung around for quite a while. And then you look at, the Missouri game as an example this year. Kansas had the ball with 4 minutes left with a chance to take the lead, and then Missouri added sort of a score for emphasis at the end. And all of that is to say, there are some people I know that have just automatically chalked this one up as a loss, and let's get to next week, right? 14.5-point favorites, more than 2 touchdowns. I think Kansas covers in this one. And I think that there's a chance, depending on the way a few of those plays go, and Lance Leipold always talks about there's 5 game-deciding plays. You just don't know when they're going to come. Depending on how Kansas does in those plays will determine whether Kansas finds a way somehow to win this game, or whether it's, hey, Kansas looked solid in a 10-point loss. Ultimately, I think Texas Tech is probably going to take this one. I'll say 35-24 is my prediction. So they cover. I think it's going to be fairly close. I don't think Texas Tech's going to blow them out. But ultimately, I do think the Red Raiders I think they're the best team in the Big 12.
Yeah, you mentioned the Missouri game, and that's kind of the feeling I get too. I have a sense that this game may unfold in a similar fashion to the Missouri game, in that maybe there's some plays early in the game that give Kansas some positive momentum. It's maybe a little bit of a back and forth early on in the first half. The offense is able to make some plays. Maybe you get a big play or two from the defense. You get into the third quarter, and it's still a pretty tight game. But then I just get the sense that one of two things is going to happen, or maybe both will happen together. I think at some point, the Kansas defense is probably just going to wear down and not quite be able to slow down Texas Tech as much, later in the game. And I also just wonder if the offense has enough juice then to keep up with that and to continue to have different creative ways of moving the football against a really good Texas Tech defense. And maybe if they don't slow down in the second half as well. So I'm kind of with you. I get the sense that this will unfold in a similar manner to Missouri, in that it's going to be a close game, going to be a close-ish game. Maybe even Kansas has the lead in the third quarter, and you feel like maybe there's a chance, and then it's just like a vice grip. The Texas Tech talent will start to take over a little bit going into the fourth quarter, and I think ultimately they will win. But similarly to you, I think Kansas will probably cover. I think this could be a game where it's 35-27. Maybe Tech gets a late touchdown and makes it 42-27, which I guess wouldn't be Kansas covering at that point. But that's kind of where I'm at, I think. So I'm gonna go with Tech 42, Kansas 27. I think actually is going to be my final score prediction. Which I guess if you're a betting individual, that would be Kansas not covering.
Yeah.
But again, I suspect that it might be maybe it's a 28-27 game in the third quarter, and maybe Tech scores and Kansas just doesn't have enough juice left in the fourth quarter, and Tech kind of pulls away a little bit. But that's kind of where I'm at, and so I think this will be, if this game unfolds in that fashion, I think you can look back on it and say, okay, yeah, maybe Kansas is, a top 6-ish team in the Big 12, but just maybe not quite fully there to take on, the best team in the Big 12, which I agree with you, Kevin, in your assessment. I think Tech is probably that right now and looks like they're well on their way to probably going to the Big 12 title game. But I think on the flip side for Kansas, if this game unfolds in that fashion, you can look at it and say, okay, on the road, tough environment, and you're there, you had a shot at it, similar discussion to the Missouri game. And then I think beyond that, you can say to yourself, well, okay, maybe if you play at that level or if you build off that, even in a loss off the bye week going through the rest of your schedule, and you end up, taking some of these games you have coming up against K-State, later in the year against Iowa State, and in the year against Utah, you may just do enough to where you can insert yourself back into that Big 12 title conversation. I've talked about it. It's probably going to be a situation where you're going to have Tech and then probably 3 or 4 or 5 teams that all have maybe, 3 losses in conference play. And maybe your best bet is just have the right wins, I guess. And maybe you get the tiebreakers to go your way. So that's still a path, I think, even if KU does lose this game against Texas Tech. But yeah, I'm going to go with the Red Raiders as well on this one.
Yeah, I've heard about 35 different Big 12 fan bases claim to be the second best team in the Big 12 this year.
Exactly.
Whether it's BYU, Arizona State, any one of Cincinnati, any one of these different ones, there's not a gap there really at all. But unfortunately, I do think that there may be a gap a little bit between Texas Tech and sort of that group that's competing to get into the Big 12 title game.
Yeah. Well, that's going to do it for this edition of the show, unless you got anything else to add, Kevin, but I know you got to get out of here.
Yeah. No, it should be a game worth watching, actually. I know a lot of people are already pretty defeatist about this game. And I would just say, especially if Jalen Daniels plays the type of game like he did in that Missouri game that we've referenced, and I'm sorry we keep bringing it up, it's just that this does have a lot of similarities, I think, to that game, then Kansas will have a chance.
And we'll be breaking it all down live after the game on Saturday night on our YouTube channel at Kansas Jayhawks KCSN. So you'll absolutely want to subscribe. If you haven't already, look, if you've made it this far into the show and you haven't subscribed, I don't know what else to tell you, man. What are you doing? I mean, what are you doing? It's one click. So please click that subscribe button and then come join us on Saturday night live after the KU Texas Tech game, 6:30 kick. So we will almost certainly be live on YouTube channel by between 10 and 10:15, probably after the game, to be talking about it. And you can join us along with many other fantastic KU fans live on Saturday night after the KU Texas Tech game. Until then, he is Kevin Flaherty. I'm Nick Springer. We'll talk to you again soon. See ya.